Today, we'll discuss strategies to protect your retirement from sequence of returns risk. The order of your investment returns can seriously jeopardize your retirement savings. Let's face it, no one wants to run out of money in retirement. Today, we're going to look at 14 simple and effective strategies for protecting yourself against this risk. If you find topics like this helpful, take a moment to subscribe for future content. Your support is very much appreciated. But first, let's understand exactly what we're dealing with. Sequence of returns risk is the risk that the timing of your investment returns can seriously impact your retirement savings, especially when you start taking withdrawals to live on. A period of poor returns early on in retirement can be far more damaging than the same period of poor returns later on, even if the long-term average return is strong. Sequence of returns risk is particularly dangerous because it could combine with what we call sequence of inflation risk. When these two occur together, as they did in the decade after 1966, one of the worst years historically to retire, it creates the perfect storm for retirees, since you're losing money on your investments and needing to take out even more just to pay the bills. Let me show you 3 real-world examples using historical S&P 500 data. We'll look at someone retiring with a $1 million portfolio in 3 different years. Now, I should mention that while we're using 100% equity portfolios here to illustrate the point, most modern retirement portfolios include bonds for stability. Our first retiree started their journey in 1955. This turned out to be quite uneventful. Both the actual and reversed returns didn't make a huge difference to the portfolio's survival. That said, the actual returns still outperformed the reversed sequence by $2 million. When we look at the data, we see negative returns were spread fairly evenly throughout this period. Even with higher inflation in the last 15 years, the portfolio had grown enough to weather this storm. Now, let's look at someone retiring in 1979. This is an example where the sequence of returns has a huge impact. With actual historical returns, the portfolio would have grown to $20 million after 30 years. But with reversed returns, the portfolio has a $5 million shortfall. That's a $25 million difference. More importantly, this portfolio would have been depleted by year 16, in 1994, leaving our retiree with a significant shortfall to make up. Looking at the data, we can see why. The first half of retirement had higher inflation than the second half. When we reverse the returns, putting significant negative returns earlier in retirement, we create that perfect storm of both sequence risks hitting at once. Our final example looks at someone retiring just 2 years later, in 1981. While actual returns still significantly outperformed reversed returns by about $7.2 million, the crucial difference is that the portfolio with reversed returns didn't fail. In fact, it would have ended with $2.5 million remaining. So why does sequence of returns risk have such a massive impact, especially when poor returns hit early in retirement? There are 2 main reasons, even when the average return remains the same: withdrawals and inflation. Together, these force you to increase those withdrawals to maintain your purchasing power. This is why some experts call it dollar cost averaging. The main takeaway here is simple: none of us knows what our future sequence of returns will be. You could retire into conditions like 1955 and do fine, or you might face something more challenging like 1966. So what can you do about it? There are 3 main strategies: generating non-portfolio income, protecting your portfolio, and maintaining spending flexibility. These fall into 2 categories: factors you can partially control and factors fully within your control. Remember, market returns and inflation are completely outside your control. So let's focus on what you can influence. Start with non-portfolio income. The more diverse and numerous your income sources, the less you'll need to rely on your retirement savings. This often means lower withdrawal rates and better protection against market volatility. First and most importantly, there's your state pension. You need 10 qualifying years on your national insurance record to receive any state pension, and 35 years of NI contributions for the full state pension. If you have gaps in your record, you can make voluntary payments. Normally, you can only do this for the previous 6 tax years, but there's currently a special offer from HMRC and DWP, ending the 5th of April 2025, allowing you to fill gaps back to 2006. Please check your state pension forecast on gov.uk, don't miss this opportunity. Second, consider a phased retirement if your employer offers it. Gradually reducing your work hours while continuing to save can provide a great balance. It helps maintain your sense of purpose, keeps you active, and preserves your social connections while managing work stress. Just be careful of one more year syndrome. Before you know it, your phased retirement has lasted 15 years. For UK residents, be particularly careful not to trigger the Money Purchase Annual Allowance, or MPAA. By taking taxable pension withdrawals, as this will reduce your annual allowance from £60,000 to £10,000. Third, many retirees find fulfillment and extra income through part-time work or side hustles, ideally in areas they're passionate about. Consulting and freelancing can provide valuable cash flow if markets underperform, especially early in retirement. Here's a simple example. Working just half a day a week for 42 weeks covers around 6% of annual expenses, based on Retirement Living Standards moderate lifestyle estimates. Double that to one full day, and you're covering 12% of expenses, even at minimum wage rates. Finding even a small amount of part-time work can really add up. Fourth, for those with second properties, consider generating rental income. Real estate can provide steady cash flow, though being a landlord isn't for everyone. If you have a spare room in your home, the rent-a-room scheme allows you to earn up to £7,500 tax-free, worth considering if you're comfortable with sharing your space. Fifth, downsizing could unlock significant equity from your home. This can be particularly beneficial if you have a mortgage or high maintenance costs. However, I'd suggest exploring other options before making this significant life change. Finally, annuities have become increasingly attractive due to favorable rates. You have various options: fixed term versus lifetime, and also level versus escalating and inflation-linked. Generally, more certainty means higher cost. Escalating and inflation-linked lifetime annuities typically take 20 to 25 years to recoup their cost. A good compromise might be a fixed-term escalating or inflation-linked annuity, to cover part of your essential expenses for the first 10 to 15 years of retirement, providing protection against both sequence risks. That said, this peace of mind comes at a cost, so weigh your options carefully. Now let's talk about factors entirely within your control, your portfolio options. First up is diversification. As Jack Bogle famously said, don't look for the needle in the haystack. Just buy the haystack. This means spreading your investments across different asset classes, sectors, market sizes, geographic regions, and themes to reduce concentration risk. While the US equities have been a strong performer historically, it's crucial to remember that past performance doesn't guarantee future results. In fact, experts at Morningstar, Vanguard, JP Morgan, Schwab, and BlackRock all project lower future long-term returns for the US market compared to a globally diversified portfolio. This is partly due to current elevated US equity valuations, which leaves less room for significant growth. Most popular global equity indices like MSCI World, FTSE All Cap, and FTSE All World are market cap weighted, meaning they're now heavily concentrated in US stocks, particularly technology and AI companies. Just look at the top 10 holdings in the FTSE All World Index, and you'll see what I mean. If you're looking for something different, there are a few notable indexes and funds that don't rely on market capitalization. For those who want US exposure without the tech and AI bias, consider alternatives like the S&P 500 Equal Weight Index. For global diversification, look at options like the FTSE RAFI All World 3000 Index or the FTSE RAFI Developed 1000 Index. They weight their holdings based on factors like cash flow and total sales. And let's not forget the slightly unintuitive and unconventional rising equity glide path. Next, let's talk about portfolio rebalancing, selling assets that have outperformed and buying those that have underperformed to maintain your target asset allocation. This naturally reduces portfolio volatility by preventing overconcentration in any one area. Since stocks have historically outperformed bonds over the long term, rebalancing often means selling some stocks and buying bonds, which helps manage risk. There's also an opportunistic element in down markets, as rebalancing lets you buy equities at lower prices. I've covered this topic more extensively in another video, which I'll link above and in the description. Third, consider holding cash reserves for 2 to 3 years of expenses. This simple but effective strategy helps you ride out market downturns without being forced to sell investments at a loss. Think of it as your spending buffer during tough times. The bucket strategy is another approach to reduce the pressure to sell growth investments in a down market. The contemporary bucket strategy divides your portfolio into 3 buckets, using a time segmentation approach, corresponding to short-term, medium-term, and long-term expenses. I'm not a fan of the 3-bucket strategy for several reasons, and will point you to my other video discussing this in more depth. However, I suggest exploring the simplified bucket strategy I discuss in another video. This straightforward 6-year, 2-bucket strategy is an example of a bucket overlay on the total return approach, designed to offer peace of mind without the unnecessary complexity of the 3-bucket strategy. Its simplicity and effectiveness stem from adopting the total return approach, and simply rebalance. Now, let's look at spending factors, an area where you have significant control. First, understand your discretionary spending. These are the expenses you can adjust or cut back on if needed during a market downturn. Discretionary spending usually peaks in the early years of retirement and tends to decrease over time as you enter the slow-go years. Things like holidays, dining out, hobbies, and subscriptions are all examples of areas where you can reduce costs if the market takes a hit. Using the Retirement Living Standards Moderate Lifestyle as a baseline, I've identified potential cutbacks totaling about 8% of target expenses, and that's without touching major items like holidays or dining out. The key is planning these tiers of discretionary spending in advance, so you know exactly where you can cut back if needed. Second, consider inflation heuristics, simple rules that can have a big impact. There are two main types: inflation waiver and inflation haircut. The inflation waiver rule, proposed by Guyton in 2004 and widely adopted by firms like Morningstar and Vanguard, skips inflation adjustments for the following year if your portfolio value declines. However, this can be quite rigid, potentially leading to unnecessary lifestyle reductions even with minor portfolio declines. The inflation haircut rule offers a gentler approach. Instead of skipping inflation adjustments entirely, it reduces them by a small amount, say 1%, regardless of portfolio performance. This helps preserve purchasing power while still being responsive to market conditions. Research by David Blanchett shows this approach can allow for a 0.5% higher initial withdrawal rate while maintaining a 90% success rate with balanced portfolios. When I analyzed minimum pension pot sizes using timeline planning, I found that a 1% inflation haircut reduced the required amounts by 10% for single retirees and 13% for couples. Simple and effective. Dynamic withdrawal strategies offer structured frameworks balancing spending flexibility with portfolio longevity. They involve adjusting your withdrawals based on market performance, allowing you to spend more in good years and less in bad years. These include the Guyton Klinger Guardrails, Vanguard Dynamic Spending Rule, Bengen Floor Ceiling Approach, and Kitz's Ratcheting Rule. With the exception of Kitz's, these address sequence risk by reducing spending in down markets while allowing increases in good years. I've covered these in detail in other videos, which I'll link in the description. Finally, retirement cash flow modeling tools like Voyant and Timeline Planning bring everything together. They help you project future income and expenses throughout retirement, considering factors like inflation, investment returns, taxes, and planned spending. They're great for creating what-if scenarios and stress testing your plans using Monte Carlo simulation. Remember, this isn't a one-and-done exercise. Review your cash flow models regularly, especially in the first 10 to 15 years of retirement when sequence risk has the most impact, and when significant changes occur in your life, the markets, or tax laws. I suggest annual reviews during this critical period, then perhaps every 2 to 3 years afterwards unless significant events occur. If you're not comfortable with cash flow modeling, consider working with a fee-only financial advisor. Most importantly, keep things simple. As Charlie Munger wisely said, simplicity has a way of improving performance by enabling us to better understand what we are doing. This is particularly important if your spouse isn't as financially savvy or interested in complex planning. One of my viewers hit the nail on the head when he posted, "I don't want a second career as a fund manager once I retire." Couldn't have said it better myself. That's it for today. If you found this video helpful and want to explore more about preparing for retirement, check out this video where I walk you through a pre-retirement checklist and some key actions to take. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. Feel free to drop any questions in the comments below, and I'll make sure to answer them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.